I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Board of Selectmen to order for Monday, December 18th, 2023. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, first Selectmen's report. I'll be brief. Last Wednesday, the 13th, the Mather Center had another senior lunch. It was the Circle of Light holiday lunch and entertainment for those folks. So kudos to Beth Paris again for pulling together a really great event, and we appreciate police and everyone else who served lunch that day. And it was a fine time by all. I think there were 200 people there. Quite the crowd. I was impressed. We had an HHR building meeting last Wednesday as well. We're going to cover all that here shortly, but I just wanted to say thanks to Chris and everyone who presented at that meeting. I know you're about to repeat all that, but all your efforts for this are genuinely appreciated, and thank you. I had a chance to attend a West Cog meeting up in Richfield. That was my first one, and met several other first selectmen and mayors from other towns, including the new mayor of Danbury. And quite interesting. I was impressed by how well coordinated that organization is. Francis Pickering, who's their executive director, is a forward character, but I tell you what, he's extremely well informed and demonstrated that on a call today with Stanford executives to talk about potential grants that maybe even Darien could take advantage of. But it's great to have West Cog, and as well informed as that group is, helping us with our interests. So that was a terrific meeting. This past Saturday, I had a chance to go to the Spring Grove Cemetery. You may be familiar with the Wreaths Across America organization. They collect money and purchase pine wreaths, Christmas wreaths, to put on the graves of veterans from the many wars that we fought. And I gave a brief talk there, and a very good turnout. Lots of high school kids to help with distributing and placing the wreaths, as well as other citizens. I think there were probably 200 people there, but Mike, you were there. And just really well attended, and just a great community event. Next year when they put that on, if you have a chance to go, it's terrific. Had a really nice time there. We had a pretty bad storm last night. Not super destructive, but as of about 5 o'clock this afternoon, there were 74 people still without power in the town. That's driven by fallen trees. And so please stay away from any live power lines that you see, and know that Eversource is on this. We do not have all power restored at the moment, but they are working on it. That 74 is down from 165 people without power that we had this morning at 8 o'clock. So it's unfortunate that we'll get storms like this, but I'm glad that Eversource is trying to get people's power restored as quickly as possible. You should know that there is quite the infrastructure in the state of Connecticut that helps towns and municipalities stay abreast of fast-moving storms like this. I've been on a couple calls where there are no fewer than 100 or 200 people on the line, and these are professionals at the state level, meteorologists, people who direct emergency planning efforts for the state, and they are extremely well prepared and informed. But it's great to know that we have a resource like that that's available to assist us, but also just keep us up to speed on the absolute latest with regard to storm track and potential damage from that storm. So if you are in any kind of trouble coming out of the storm, or have difficulties remaining, including your power not coming back on, please call the Selectman's office. If there's something we can do to assist, we will, and try to direct the resources that you need to get back on your feet. So I appreciate everybody doing their best to manage the storm system. Today, Congressman Jim Himes, the congressman for the 4th District, paid us a visit here in Darien. I went over with him to a new business called One Medical. They are a provider of primary care services located over in the Darien Commons, and met with the folks there. It's great to see these new businesses and these shiny new facilities opening up like that, especially one like this that has gotten off to a good start and had some good success. Congressman was very nice to come here with his team to pay a visit to those folks, and I had a chance to visit with the congressman for about half an hour this afternoon to talk about the interests of our town in terms of maybe leveraging federal grants or other things that the feds could do to be of assistance to us. I think it's very important to have relationships with all of our federal and state officials that represent us in their various bodies here in Darien. The congressman certainly one of those, and our other state and federal officials. I look forward to expanding on the relationship that Monica and Jamie and others have built with them. I think it's important to do that for our town. These are powerful elected officials that can do a lot for us, and so I want to make sure we have every chance to continue the good relationships we have with those folks. That's about all I have for the first Selectmen's report. Kate?
Two things. As you all know, our Director of Health announced that he's retiring at the end of the fiscal year. So we will begin the search process for a new replacement no later than March, but we'll start talking about how we're going to go about doing that in the next couple months. And then for our daily parkers, parking must be paid for at the time you park, not at the time you come back to your car and find the ticket on it. So
Note to self. Sorry. Okay.
That's the way that works.
That's the way that works, yes. People don't seem to realize that, but we have signs up that pay when you park.
Quick shout out, by the way, to David Knauf. How long has he been our health director?
About 15 years.
15 years. And so he's retiring after committing himself to the town and helping us in this very important capacity. Very important capacity. And I wish him well in his retirement. I know he's going to help us with the transition to new leadership for all that. And I look forward to meeting and talking with him about that. But I think I could speak for everyone. We're certainly appreciative of his service to the town and wish him well as he begins whatever his next chapter is. So kudos to David for all his help. Anything else, Kate, or is that it? Okay, terrific. Board liaison reports. Mr. Burke.
The Blight Review Board met on December 13th. We reviewed 13 properties on the list. 9 of those are in fine gathering stage. We had invited 5 property owners to come and discuss the blight conditions at their various properties. 3 availed themselves of the opportunity to come and speak to us. So we are working with them to see if they can't get their properties into a condition where the fines will cease. The 2 property owners who did not come, who were on a watch list, will now be converted into a fine list, and we hope that they will come and speak with us and see what we can do to resolve the situation. And we will meet next in January, 2nd Wednesday in January.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. That's it. Marcy.
Sure. Oxbridge Building Committee did meet on Thursday. We were hoping that it was going to be our last meeting, and I don't think that's going to happen. There's still a couple of little punch lists that we've got to take care of. So we'll meet again next month as well. They will be removing the slide. I know that was a kind of a question that many people have had. It's still been gated. The kids have not had access to it, but that will be coming out over the Christmas break. It will be regraded and seeded so that it's just a nice hill. They're working on some drainage issues. Of course, you know, drainage is always an issue in town, and there's been some heavy rain, so the kids have not been able to access the backyard the way that we hoped that they would have, just because there's some issues, and they're going to take a look at it and hopefully rectify that over the course of the next couple of months, so that in the spring they can get out there and get back to playing. Budget's great. We're still a little bit under $1 million less than what we had thought that we were going to go into, so project is still going really well, and we're excited to see it to its final end. The new interim principal, I got to meet him the other day. Lovely, jumped right in, had a punch list of things that he needed to have us work on, so he was, in awe of how gorgeous the school was and how well it's functioning, and is ready to do the work to kind of complete the project. So things are good in that transition. And the Mental Health Task Force did not meet as of our last meeting. However, we will be having our full meeting January, I think it's 17th, to go over what our curriculum will be for the winter and then going into the spring.
Good. Terrific. Thank you. Monica.
So Great Island, we have not met since our last meeting, the Great Island Committee, but the RTM did at the State of the Town approve the acquisition of the traffic circle, and the revision of some of the easements. And I want to thank the RTM for, first of all, including us on the State of the Town agenda. I know that's a busy night. And I want to thank the committees for taking a hard look at this with special meetings. That was really appreciated. So the Great Island Advisory Committee will be meeting on Wednesday and at 6 o'clock in this room.
Okay, terrific, thank you. Sarah?
The Henley Homes and Royal Building Committee met last Wednesday evening. We will talk more about that this evening, but I'd like to take a moment to thank both Chris Price and Board of Ed Chair John McCammon, who are right in the audience tonight. They have worked incredibly hard, as has David Martin, who's the Board of Finance rep. It has been a long few months. The committee members are also here, along with the representatives from O&G and KG&D, and I'd like to thank everyone for all of their time. So we'll hear more about that tonight, but it has been a long few months. So we thank you.
Okay, terrific. Okay, Kate, any public comments?
I have not received any.
Okay. Any members of the public have any comments? Okay, thank you. New business, discuss scheduling of appointment interviews. So this is about the Board of Selectmen meeting agenda. So the town charter requires that we have 2 meetings per month, and we intend to stick with that. But one thing that I've noticed, and I think we all have noticed, is that it's quite frequent that there is some sort of executive session business in that meeting. Not today, but many times that happens. Either there's confidential information that we have to discuss that's land or personnel related, or we have interviews for the many boards and commissions that are appointed in town that the decision for which lies with the Board of Selectmen, and it requires us to consider candidates for those roles and board positions. Unfortunately, all that stuff has to be done in executive session. So one of the things I wanted to propose, once we get through the budget season, so maybe this starts in either the last meeting in February or say, call it March 1st, is that we run an experiment where we say, let's take our docket, if you will, and we're going to split it into 2 parts. There's going to be an executive session meeting, and then there's going to be a regular public meeting. So what will happen is we will take all of our public business that needs to be conducted, and we will put that for one of those meetings that month. The other meeting we will reserve exclusively for executive session stuff, and there is enough of it, given all the different topics that I brought up before, that I think would fill the docket of those meetings, and that we could we could separate these 2 and have just one session that's executive session per month like that. One of the test questions that we have with all this is, does that ever result in a delay in town business getting done? So for example, someone comes in and wants to get something considered at that first meeting of that month, but that's an executive session meeting, so they have to wait till the second meeting that month. Does that 10-day or 2-week delay create trouble? So one of the things we'd want, if we decide to experiment with this, that's one of the things we'd want to test is there a significant volume of work that comes up that gets delayed, or unduly delayed, better said, because of this new schedule. So that's the proposition to attempt to try. I think still allows us to get all our business done. The other impetus, by the way, for doing it is I've noticed several times when we have executive sessions that can go on for a while, some folks that come to participate in our meetings are forced to wait where you all are seated right now for an hour, 2 hours sometime, and that hardly seems fair given everyone's busy schedule. So that's the proposal for discussion. We don't need to decide right away, but I did want to get that out in front of everybody for reaction. Mr. Burke.
I'd be interested to know the sort of the reverse situation, how often we do business in an executive session as a prelude to then confirming it at that meeting. So for instance, with appointments, or some of the things related to Great Island where they were discussed in executive session and then led to immediate vote.
Good point.
As opposed to then waiting, for 2 weeks. Because I know there are some times where we do these things just because we need to get a vote on them quickly, and it's sort of, boom, boom. I mean, I'm all for efficiency, but I want to make sure that we leave ourselves an ability to, act in that double fashion if necessary.
So you're saying that maybe the solution would be that in the business meeting, let's call it the business versus the interview, we could, if we needed, have an executive session in that meeting.
Mhm.
We could do
Or
that, right?
you could have a meeting, like say you wanted to just do interviews the first meeting of the month. You could do the interviews, come out into open session and appoint everybody and have that be all you do that evening so that there's not
People sitting
people
around.
sitting here waiting.
Okay.
We could do that, although to your point, you could have some land matter or tax matter or something like that that gets discussed in executive session for which there needs to be a decision. And again, this is going to be an experiment to see if we can do that. Having an executive session ring fence like that also means that it frees up TV 79 from having to cover it and all that because there's not many public sessions. So anyway, give that a think. We'll put it on an agenda after the first of the year and see if we might vote to formalize that experiment and see what happens. But again, just in the spirit of trying to free up people's time and be a little more efficient.
Two
Anything else?
questions.
Please.
So are you thinking, what about the department head meetings?
What about them?
Would they be considered the regular meeting, right?
I would say so, yes.
Okay. So quarterly, we would really not have a regular meeting. If we had the interviews and then we had that, yeah, okay. And then are you thinking Zoom for that?
I would do Zoom for
Yeah.
executive sessions because that way you could even have it during the day or something like that where if we've got town staff or attorneys that need to present something like that, we could manage that. Plus, since it's executive session, we've got a lot of flexibility in terms of when we
Yeah.
might schedule the
Okay.
meeting. So
Good idea.
anything else on that? Okay. Next up, we've got an update from the Henley Holmes Royal Committee on Funding Needs. So Chris Price and Joe McCammon are here. While they get set up, I guess I'll just say I've said a lot publicly about all this, and I appreciate everyone's indulgence as we addressed the full range of options in terms of implications given the funding increase that they're going to request this evening. I think I've said enough about all that in the sense that what I really wanted to do was to get the issues out there and to make sure everybody has a chance to weigh in on the full range of options in terms of what the Board of Education and the town might do for these high dollar investments. I'm satisfied that we've had a rich and robust discussion on that, and I believe that the proposal that is requiring the additional funding is actually quite sound, and I've had a chance to look at it in detail and talk to a lot of people who are involved in it. My personal belief is that this is what the school system needs. The pricing is unfortunate, to use an overused phrase, it is what it is. But this has been done responsibly, and the renovated buildings, when that work is completed, are really going to meet our educational needs for a long time to come. So I've heard this presentation that you're about to hear pretty completely, and I am fully supportive of all this. So, Chris or Jill?
Waiting for the technology.
Okay.
It was on.
I know everyone loves to hear my mellifluous voice. I could continue for a while, but maybe not.
We'll get everybody out of here for Monday Night Football if we can do that.
Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Mr. Price?
Yes. Well, thank you, John, for that introduction. I appreciate that. What we'll do tonight is we'll briefly summarize, before we get into the substance of the presentation, we'll sort of briefly summarize what has transpired since our committee was last before the Board of Selectmen a little over a year ago in, I guess, November of 22. And as John noted, this is a request for an additional appropriation. We'll give detail on how that's calculated, and we'll give some detail on what the additional appropriation, what it's comprised of, and then obviously respond to questions. Before we get started, though, I want to thank a number of folks who came this evening and introduce them. Some folks came from quite a ways. Eric Kyer from KG&D, who's the lead architect on the project. Dave Cravenzola and Laurel Purcell from ONG Industries, and Tom Walsh from AP Construction, and their joint venture is our construction manager. And then quite a few members, I think virtually all the members of our committee, save one or two, are here. So Sarah Newman, who's our liaison on the Board of Selectmen, and Jill McCammon, who's my co-chair, Dave Martin, who's also the liaison to the Board of Finance, Tom Harris, who's a member, Jamison Riley. So I think the only folks not here are Dave Kerwar and Paul Harding. And then from the school district, obviously, I'm sorry? And Patrick Hayes, correct, I'm sorry. Can't forget Patrick. And then Dr. Adley, our school superintendent, and Kevin Monret, director of facilities. And then it looks like Jim Palin from the Board of Finance came, so we can save some time when we do this presentation, hopefully tomorrow evening. In terms of the history, getting us to where we are today, as a reminder, back in August of 2021, the building committee was given a charge to renovate the three of the 5 elementary schools in town. And the committee was formed in order to do that. The committee was formed in February of 22. This is relevant because this frames what our jurisdiction, what our mandate is, in terms of what we can do beyond that or within that. When we very, very first came before this board, we laid out that the basis for the charge, next slide if you don't mind, Jill, is the elimination of the portable classrooms, renovating or building new libraries and general learning commons, right-sizing a number of the classrooms for both general use and special subjects, and then upgrading outdated systems, air conditioning all of the schools, new mechanical and electrical and building envelopes. That was subsequently expanded to include replacing the roofs on all 3 of the schools. Next slide. The question has been asked to us, why are we renovating 3 schools and not building new schools? I mean, obviously, Marcy was talking about Oxbridge, and I think everybody's very, very pleased with how Oxbridge came out. Prior to our committee being formed, a general condition study was conducted. There was a lot of thinking done on the decision to either build new or renovate. And as to these 3 schools, the decision was made to renovate, mostly because you had the original construction of these 3 schools was very high quality. They've been maintained very, very well since the last renovations. How they sit on their plots is optimal. They're also 8-acre plots as versus larger plots like Oxbridge, so it would have been logistically a little bit more difficult to build. And then obviously cost played a factor. And the portables is a driving factor as well. The portables are way past their useful life. I think, Kevin, you noted that the portables, you were told they're supposed to last 2 to 3 years, and they've been up for almost 20 in some cases. The renovated schools, and this came up in our meeting last Wednesday, the renovated schools, if they're renovated in accordance with the design that we have currently teed up, should have a useful life of between 25 and 30 years. Building new schools would cost, and we can get into this in detail if people want to, would cost roughly twice, maybe a little bit more than twice, what we're budgeting to renovate the 3 schools, and would also materially delay the project, and would project out to when the kids would be in the 3rd of the new schools, almost to 2030. That is a 70%, roughly 70% of the schools. It's an addition, it's not just a renovation, there is going to be a number of additions and alterations. So for example, on 2 of the 3 schools, there's going to be new spaces built that'll include libraries and also material alterations.
About 70% of the total building will be either new or renovated by the time the project is over. It is not a 100% renovation.
Next slide. So in the spring of 2023, we completed our construction drawings. We did updated cost estimates. We did an initial round of bids in the summer of 2023. Candidly, that bid process had lower than we had hoped participation by contractors. We attributed that to the time of year when there was already a lot of projects underway. The kind of project it was, which is less attractive than a new build. And we were also looking to accelerate the construction schedule, have them working 6 days a week. The bids that we got exceeded our going-in estimates by about 25%. Through a series of discussions, meetings, analysis, we decided to rebid 12 of the 19 trade packages. 7 of the trade packages we determined as a committee with ONG, AP, and KG&E's input were acceptable. And those trades agreed to hold their bids until the end of January 2024. Next slide, please. So in the fall of 2023, we rebid 12 of the 19 trade packages. We did consider reducing some of the scope or maybe not incorporating some of the alternates that we had considered as part of the design, but we ultimately decided against that in order to get the best quality product for our students and our families. And there was a very concerted effort by O&G and by AP, by the senior most executives in those companies, to try to increase bidder participation. We received our new bids in the first week of November the 8th of 2023. Result of the rebid was greater participation. We had, in this case, at least 3 bidders for each package. There was a slightly more narrow variance over our estimates. As I noted, in the summer of 2023, we were approximately 25% over our estimates. After the rebid, we were approximately 23%, which was in dollar terms a savings of about $1.5 million from the bids in the summer. Overall, we achieved about a 2.1% savings. Some of the examples on some of the big packages were an 8% savings on concrete and a 5.5% savings on plumbing and HVAC. And plumbing and HVAC in particular is a big one on this project because so much of the project is mechanical, electrical, and plumbing work. I think the result of the rebid was that it effectively validated the bid results from the summer. I think on reflection, our estimates going into the summer bid were too low, but the numbers that we got in November were close enough to the numbers that we got in the summer that I think it had a validating effect. O&G AP has taken all of the bid packages now, both the 7 that we held, the 12 that we rebid, and has gone through a scope review with all of those bidders and has come back to us and recommended that we accept the bids for all of the trades subject to approval of an increased appropriation. By law, we are required, because of the type of project this is, we are required to accept the lowest qualified bid, and all of the bidders for whom O&G is recommending we accept are all qualified bidders. So that's the history. That gets us up to essentially last week. And what this slide shows is an analysis on a school-by-school basis of how the costs break down. So the top line, total construction costs, that's what you think of as hard costs. That's labor, materials, et cetera. Pre-construction service fees, that's a flat number across each of the schools. Soft costs, that's furniture, fixtures, and equipment, as well as permitting fees, professional fees, et cetera. Then it shows an owner's contingency of 5%, which we'll talk about in a little bit, in more detail in a little bit, getting us to a total project cost of about $101.5 million. The total appropriation from last December in 2022 was $82,250, leaving a delta of $19,240,735, which is what we're asking for, in the aggregate this evening. Technically, and important to note for purposes of state reimbursement, these are 3 separate appropriations for 3 separate projects. So you'll note that additional $19,240,000 is broken down and allocated among the 3 elementary schools. Why do we think the increased cost? Part of that variance is due to some refinements in scope, many of which occurred after the December 2022 appropriation, which took us up to $82,250. There's detail. We have it here in bullet points. One of the documents that we sent around ahead of this presentation was literally an item-by-item calculation that Eric Kyer and Laurel had done for each of the scope refinements. Rather than going through that line by line, I would just refer you all to that. But as a highlight matter, there was, and some of these are driven, for example, we had to go in front of P&Z. And P&Z asked us to refine the stormwater detention. The design had always contemplated stormwater detention. P&Z asked us to upgrade and refine that. There were some additional site improvements, in particular at homes, but things like moving generators around and items like that. There were some security upgrades that were requested that we put in place by the school district. Basements, especially basements under some of the new construction where the schools were determined to have less than optimal storage. Teachers and principals complaining about things being stored in the hallways, which wasn't appropriate. And so rather than building some of the new additions on slabs, they were built, it was designed to put in new basements. We'd gotten a lot of input, in particular from the ARB on the main entrance and the corridors at homes. So those were redesigned. There was some ceiling replacement work because of the amount of new conduits that were being put in for the air conditioning and electrical. Also, there was some improved ceiling work for some of the cafeterias. We were asked to put equipment screens on the roof because there was going to be a lot of the HVAC equipment was going to be on the roofs of the school. Next slide. And again, I would recommend, if you wanted to look at it in detail, to look at Eric's summary memo. The other thing was we did, as I noted a little earlier in the presentation, we considered a number of alternates. We wanted to build these alternates into the project. We thought they would have a materially beneficial impact on the final products. Those were cafeteria improvements, in particular adding new acoustic ceilings and lights, additional parking spaces, removing existing underground fuel tanks, in particular at homes, building a new bus plaza at Hinley, and putting in skylights to improve the natural lighting at Royal. Again, those are itemized in Eric's more detailed memo. Next. Another contributor to the variance was just inflation, just time. It was calculated at 4.8% per year. As folks recall, last summer when we decided to rebid, as part of that analysis, we also decided to push out the start of construction to the spring of 2024. Part of that was to present a more rational construction schedule to the trades. We think having accelerated the construction schedule in the first bid, that was had a negative impact on some of the bid results. So calculated at 4.8% a year. There's a standardized industry index that's used for calculating escalation for construction projects, which is what we used here. The next slide, if you wanted some more detail, I would probably defer to Laurel and Dave from O&G, but this was because of the nature of the project. There was some additional on-site staffing that was going to be needed. Again, these are meant to be 3 projects that are going to be done simultaneously. All 3 schools are going to be underway at the same time. The MEP, because mechanical, electrical, and plumbing is such a huge part of this project, it was decided to increase the person who was going to oversee that from part-time to full-time. And there was also increased, the construction manager fees and costs are all sliding scale. They're all percentages based on cost of the work. And so as the cost of the work went up, the CM costs went up with them. We talked also about soft cost increases, the security upgrades, some additional technology that we were asked to do. The FF&E budget went up as well, and then we revised the owner's contingency to 5%. The next slide gives more detail on the contingencies. I know, we have gotten some input from various folks that contingencies are looked at carefully. People would prefer that contingencies be kept in a fairly narrow range. We think what we're proposing here for the CM's contingency at 3% and the owner's contingency of 5% 3% of construction costs for the CM, 5% of the total project cost for the owner are in line with industry standard. In particular, the owner's contingency, we think that is we think that's a rational number because of the type of project this is. I think, it's been noted to us on a number of occasions that after all, Oxridge did not use their full contingency. We've been advised in particular in an alteration project like this that there's just a greater likelihood of unknowns. Euphemistically, people say, well, you start taking walls and ceilings down, you're never entirely sure what you're going to see. And so better to be safe and have a 5% contingency. Important to note that any unused contingency at the end of the project will be returned to the town. Yeah, John.
Chris, I see that you've got the 5% contingency in the slide that you showed earlier that was 4.832 million. This is 7 million, and it looks like it doesn't include the 3%. Where is that 3% in these figures?
The 3% is built into total. Go ahead.
Inside of the construction cost.
3%.
Yeah, if you go to the slide.
Construction costs.
Go ahead.
It's within the total construction cost, the top.
So it's in the 88 million.
88,627.
So on this bigger sheet.
Okay.
Okay. And then lastly, in terms of reasons for the variance, the last slide, Jill. This is the one that I will candidly call the unquantifiables. These are just factors like there's a lot of other projects that contractors have before them to bid on. They're busy, there's a labor shortage, continues to be supply chain issues. The contractor outreach effort, O&G and AP, like I said, reached out very, very aggressively to all their contacts. In some cases, they had assurances that people were going to bid and they didn't bid. Again, part of it was, we bid twice, so in a sense, we set a bar. A number of contractors just kind of recycled their original bid. These are the results that we saw in the bidding process are not materially different from what our professional teams have seen on other school projects and on other public-private projects that have been out to bid. So again, that's, like I said, it's a little bit unquantifiable, but those are the remaining factors that we've been able to point to. That's the last slide for the presentation. If folks had any questions, we'd be happy to address any of those.
One thing to just for the board's consideration, so we're not voting on anything tonight. When it does come up for a vote, what we need to vote on is a new bond resolution and appropriation to replace the ones that were voted on for this original appropriations. We can't actually just amend them, we actually have to rewrite them. So the attorneys are working on that now. They were not able to get that ready for our meeting tonight. They might have it for Board of Finance tomorrow, but in any case, the sequence is we would vote on it first. So what we'll do is just give you all a chance to ask questions at this meeting. We could even have a sense of the board, but the plan would be at our first regular meeting in January, we will vote on those resolutions. At that time, it'll go to the Board of Finance, and we will still meet the RTM schedule for their vote on the 22nd. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is there anything else to add to that, Kate, if I got that right?
No, I have already alerted not that he didn't know, but I alerted the moderator that this was coming in. We'll send the formal request to be on the agenda as soon as I have the bond resolutions.
Okay. Questions for Chris and Jill and team?
Mike.
First, thanks for all the effort and, as usual, a great presentation. Can you tell me anything about the particulars of the subs that were bid packages that were acceptable as opposed to the 7 that were okay as opposed to the others that weren't? Was it related to a particular trade, or what were those factors that made those ones sufficient and the other ones?
Yeah, I may defer to Dave and Laurel, but generally it was because we had higher bidder participation on those trades, and so the numbers
On the first round?
in the first round,
Okay.
correct. And so, and they were a little closer to our estimates. And so because of the higher bidder participation, we had a higher degree of comfort that those numbers weren't skewed.
And they were willing to hold their number.
And they were willing to hold their number. As versus, I think, O&G went back to the entire range, the whole 19, all 19 of the trade packages, and asked if they would hold. And these 7 said that they would. So it was a little bit of, well, do we want to go and take another shot at this to have some incremental improvement? Or do we want to have these guys, where we had sufficient participation, who are willing to hold, to lock them in?
I think it's an important question. Thank you for asking it. It's important to emphasize that it was really critical that we get the right coverage in addition to getting the right price point, because you wanted to make sure you had an appropriate spread in the prices that were on the table in order to validate the results of the bidding. So yes, Chris's formula is correct. Coverage plus price plus willingness to hold. And we were within about 8% with those 7 bids that we kept.
Some of those were pretty material ones too, like the roof, for example, right? The roof, I think, was one of the trades that we...
The windows, remember the windows?
The windows, right.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's actually, that's what I meant, was the roofers, the windows, like what were the trades that you like to initially?
You have that
Did
list,
we
don't you?
initially accept that?
The 7?
That we
were
carried
kept? Is that
forward.
what you're asking?
Yeah, the 7 we did not rebid.
Masons?
Hang on.
Do you need David up at the mic?
Yeah.
Can you go up to the mic, so for TV 79?
Yeah.
I have to go from that one.
I'm just.
I have it in my office at home. I didn't bring that particular sheet, but you want to, Dave Cravenzola, you want
Sure.
to come up here, please?
Yep, just going off my list here. Abatement and demolition, masonry, aluminum entrances, storefronts and curtain walls, painting, fire protection,
And one electrician.
correct, one of the 3 electricians.
That was it?
That was it.
Okay, thank you.
Chris, I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
I think it's important that we understand what percentage of this project was the portables. I think that when this project started, a lot of people focused on the portables, but I think it was very clear that, you made it very clear that there were other components in this. And I don't want people to think this is kind of a mission creep or job creep on this, that those were all, those components were always a big factor, correct?
Well, the removal of the portables and not using the portables going forward, but the removal of the portables led to a lot of the rest of the project, right?
Right.
So once you get rid of the portables, you had to replace that space with new space. So I'm not sure there's a direct sort of dollar to dollar for dollar. I mean, I guess you could on a per square foot basis, but I'm not sure that would be a really valid analysis, right? You take the portables down, there's a cost to taking them down, but that frankly is pretty nominal in the scheme of things. But it's the creation of the new space that you need that the portables represented, integrating that new space into the schools, the new mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems that would go to service that new space, is all tied into the removal of the portables and integrating that into permanent school space.
And maybe Dave can comment on the percentage of the project that is actually the mechanicals cost, so people can understand, because that's actually a large portion of the project. And once you replace the portables, we had buildings like Laurel where you had 3 legacy systems. We're not going to add a 4th. So yes, that was already on the table, but it made double sense with the removal of the portables. So I think it's probably very important for people to understand that once we started to move the portables, you had to look at where you were going to put the classrooms and also what swing space you were going to be able to use. So I think it is important for people to understand, and Eric could probably speak to how that sort of merry-go-round of spaces worked, because we worked very carefully to be thoughtful about how we needed to reconfigure the space to meet the standards set by Ox Ridge in terms of the size of the classrooms, the quality of what was being touched, and the quality of the library. But the library was part of it because that's what made sense in terms of moving the puzzle around. But I think it would be helpful to hear from both Eric and David about the cost of the mechanicals and then the moving parts from a design perspective.
Yeah, we'll do that.
24.5.
What are the questions, yeah, maybe we get to the rest of your questions
Okay.
before we bring those guys up.
Yeah, so I have another one. So I think I appreciate all the work you did on the alternatives. I do have, I think I was on the call the other day, and it was, I think it was very thorough. A lot of my questions were answered, but I think Oxbridge is 110,000 square feet,
Correct.
right? Not 95. So when you're penciling out these other alternatives, you're at 70,000 for the other schools. Why would those be so much smaller?
Why would these schools be so much smaller?
Yeah.
So we don't have ELP.
Okay, that's that difference. Okay. And then I saw that you would need 10 acres.
Mhm.
So if you wanted to redo the 3 schools where they are and do this alternative A2, would you be able to do that on that footprint?
I don't know that you need 10 acres. I think it's the state it's optimized at 10 acres. Obviously, there are places in more urban settings that are using less than 10 acres for their schools. It would just be tighter. You would lose playground space. You would probably lose parking. It would be ideal to be on 10 acres, but we could build new schools on the 8 acres that we have. So.
Okay, so it's not correct. And then my last question is, when you're considering these alternatives, even just the simple one of taking it from 70%, plus or minus, to 100%
Renovation.
upgrade, right?
Yeah.
What are we looking at for timing?
Well, I think the way we thought about that, and I'll let Eric address all of this stuff collectively, but, again, to some extent, going back to the original charge, right? I mean, part of the reason we're here tonight is that we realize that our charge is either move forward with a renovation as contemplated within the ed specs that we have at the price point we're at, or not. And if the decision is or not, well, then we can dive more deeply into alternatives. So we talked about alternatives more as a point of comparison to kind of where we are in the project as conceived and as being done within the ed specs. The A2 that you describe is, if we wanted to do a more fulsome renovation, get all the bathrooms at all the schools, for example, upgrade FF&E in all the classrooms. One thought that we had, and again, it's beyond the purview of this committee, it's beyond our charge, it's beyond the ed specs, but it's something that could be considered by the Board of Education down the road as a supplement to this project, and it could be done as kind of a second phase of this project, effectively. But I'll let Eric address all of the logistics of that and how that might work from a design standpoint.
So the real difference between the A1 and the A2 is the A1, as Jill mentioned earlier, is about 70% of the building is either new or fully renovated for those classroom spaces. To take that from 70% up to 100% of those classrooms, so every student has a similar experience when they go into the classroom. They have new furniture, they have new ceilings, new lighting, new floors, for example. That's what that difference was between A1 and A2.
Right.
It doesn't mean that 100% of that building is renovated. You may still have windows that were not included as part of this. It was really the classroom experience that we wanted to make sure that every student had the same experience going in there, and that places like the restrooms were updated, which weren't necessarily part of the original ed specs. And that's pretty important because the HHR BC gave us a charge at the beginning to look at the ed specs and do renovations and alterations to these 3 schools that meet those ed specs, which are basically the ed specs that were created for Oxbridge. And whenever we looked at things that started to go beyond that, we were constantly having to reevaluate and discuss back, well, that's not really part of the charge here. We'd love to, for example, you saw a slide tonight where it said cafeterias and replacing ceilings and lighting in cafeterias. Well, that wasn't in the ed specs, and so that's why it wasn't part of the base. It was an alternate there. Timeline?
Yeah,
So- So the timeline is probably, for A1, obviously, if it's your decision to proceed forward, the construction would start in June. And it would continue straight through. The additional renovations would have to go back through the state process. So there'd be a design effort on our end and discussions as to what's included. Mentioned, we want to update all the classrooms and all the toy rooms. Do you also want to replace windows? So it comes to a point where we really have to decide how much of the rest of this 30% of the building are we really renovating? And so then we come up with a budget for that, come back in front of you and say, this is where we feel this budget is. And if you approve that, then we would go to the state process and see how much of a reimbursement we could get from the state. When that's done, then we would go out to bid with that work.
But
Most likely aren't going to go to the same contractor. I mean, they could be part of the bid process, but you would bid that work. And that work would most likely be able to be done, and we're, for the most part, talking about interior work, could be done at the tail end of this current project. So most likely the second summer, some of that work could take place. Or perhaps if it's all different contractors and you want to finish one project first, you would probably pick that up the following summer and do that work the following summer.
But for A1 and the sort of 70% renovated, the state approval work is done. You guys would go straight forward if that's approved. It's
That's
only
correct.
the A2 that would require all this additional
That's correct.
design and approval work. Got it. Marcy or Sarah? I'm sorry, Monica, do you have any other questions?
No, I'm good.
Sarah or Marcy? No, Sarah, questions? You've had enough of all this. Okay.
Just a little discussion on the three buildings, because at Homes, for example, most of the classrooms in Homes are right size. When I say right size, the appropriate size for a full-size classroom. When Hindley and Royal were originally designed and constructed, those classrooms are smaller. And so in those cases, we had to do more interior renovation to expand those classrooms so that a 600 square foot classroom could be expanded into an 800 square foot classroom. And so in those projects, Royal, for example, has a lot more new construction associated with it, because we're eliminating portables, and we were right-sizing existing classrooms to create that additional new classroom space. So everybody, again, has a renovated space and the right size for the classroom purposes. And at Homes, we didn't have that as the same condition. The condition at Homes was really, we had portables for music, and we wanted to make sure that those music classrooms were in the right location. When you're looking at a project, it's a great opportunity to re-envision, make sure that everything is in the right location. And so that ultimately, at Homes, the right location for the music classrooms was in the front of the building, because you have the cafeteria and you have the stage right there, and when you have performances, it's happening right there. And to have the music classrooms and musical instruments, et cetera, adjacent to that was the right approach. And so that modified what pre-selection, there was an approach that was different. And then after a series of iterations and discussions, it was determined that this was the best location for that. And it also addressed another concern, which was security at the entrance there, that you had a security vestibule which was inside the lobby as opposed to pulled outside the lobby, so that there's students can freely go from classroom to classroom and get out to the music without having to go through an unsecured zone.
So when you're talking, so those are scope refinements. So the soil, unsuitable soil, was like $1.1 million additional. Can you explain that to me? That just seems a lot for moving dirt.
I might have Dave come up here for that one, or Tom, or Laurel. When we say unsuitable soil, it's usually about soil that we can't put back underneath a new construction building. It's not that it's contaminated or bad for other purposes. it's not suitable for actual new construction. So when you're digging this out to put new footings and foundations in, you can't use that as a subsurface because it doesn't have the bearing capacity that's required from a structural point of view, because over time, if you did it with unsuitable soil, you probably would have cracks.
Like, for example, some of that may have been fill from prior renovations,
Right.
right, which you now can't use to support the weight
So you
of
explained it.
new construction.
She's like, I can sit down.
It just, because you're basically handling the soil twice, and there's quite a bit of it. There's like 3,000 yards or more at each school. So it's because there's 3 different schools. So when it adds up to a greater number. And to get back to your mechanical versus the total trade, so the mechanical across all 3 schools is worth, mechanical plumbing and HVAC is worth 24.5 million out of 77 million. So it's like roughly a third, right, of the overall trade cost. So it's a very large amount. There's just a little bit of contaminated soils too that actually has to be hauled off site. I'm going from memory, one had like 400 yards of soil. So all of that costs like $200 a yard to get rid of. So there's just a little bit of contaminated soil at each of the 3 schools, which will be hauled off site, and then the rest is what they call polluted soils, which is it's going to remain on site, but it just needs to be handled. So it's just one more thing that was added on that was not contemplated.
So it's just the volume.
It's just because of the volume
Right.
of what we're digging.
Okay.
Sarah?
I will say this, I just, and it's some of it's restating the obvious, but this is an incredibly ambitious and complex project. From removing the portables and creating libraries and new spaces and right-sizing classrooms, there's a lot in this project. And we have done an incredible amount of work to try to figure out the right things to do for each of the schools. All of the people in this room have spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours just in the past year. I know that it's an enormous amount of money, but I would like to at least appease some folks, but it has definitely been a very thoughtful enterprise, and we're trying to do the right thing by the town. So
And you worked really hard.
you know, it's an incredibly complex project. And I know that some of the folks in Darien are questioning, but I just want people to understand that this has been incredibly, incredibly thoughtful.
You know, I certainly remember at the start, an inception of, this plan and doing these renovations and having gone on those school tours and seeing some of those rooms in Henley in particular, thinking it's unbelievable that there are kids learning in this, space. And so I know there's been a lot of energy and effort, that has gone into this for several years. I think it's my question to you, Jill. I mean, obviously it was a shock to the system when, these bids, came in, but, you and your board still believe in this project and still believe that this is the right way to go, the 9 of you.
Well, there's 2 questions there. The right process is that this comes to you guys next. The building committee doesn't take it directly to the Board of Ed. So the Board of Ed hasn't officially contemplated this or acted on it in any regard.
Okay.
This does represent the plan that the board put in place in 2016. You were a part of certainly the master plan work and the follow-up from that. Thank you. And so, certainly this is a greater price point than what we were expecting. I think it's important for people to understand that it is a 70%. The school system does strongly feel that these renovations need to be done, that these are high-quality buildings, and that the time for it to do it is now. Alan, I think, is prepared to speak to that educationally, and I think it would be wise to take a moment to talk to Kevin about what we've been waiting on the buildings with the idea that these renovations were going to come.
And I think that and I'll turn it over to Kevin in a second, because I think sort of the elephant in the room is, right, well, gee, why don't we just build 3 new schools, right? And I think it's, from our perspective, again, that's way beyond the purview of our jurisdiction, but I think it's overly simplistic to say, well, we spend an additional $100 million and we get 3 new schools. I think it's things like what Kevin's going to talk about, the amount of deferred maintenance that'll be required in the time period that's necessary to build 3 new schools. The time that it's going to take to build 3 new schools, how you're going to configure those new schools. There's a lot, the fact that you'll have to reconfigure, you can't These are schools that you may not be able to build like you did with Ox Ridge. You may not be able to leave the existing school in place and operating because of the size of the parcels. Monica talked about 10 acres versus 8 acres, right? Ox Ridge, you had the benefit of the space to be able to keep the old school running, where we're not sure you'd be able to do that here. So there's a lot of, you start peeling the onion back, and it's not as simple as
Right.
spend more money, get new schools. So I'll turn it over to Kevin to talk a little bit about deferred maintenance.
So Chris did a really nice job teeing it up, and, to say deferred maintenance, I don't know if that's necessarily the right term, but certainly we didn't address or come forward to the school board with capital projects for these 3 schools because we were eagerly anticipating the launch of HHR. So, we do have roofs that are taking in moisture. We have mechanical issues that we struggle with daily. We have the older sections of Hinley and Royal come right to mind where they're overheating because we're still running a 1940 steam system. So to be able to get through that with this project, it can't be overstated how important this is to those 3 schools and the students and teachers that are in them.
And Jill, your board voted, the building committee voted unanimously to go forward with this.
Correct, 7-0.
I don't have any more questions.
Other questions, Marcy? Okay. I don't know what we need to do to take a sense of the board, whether it's just,
Ask for a sense of the board.
okay. I'd like to get a sense of the board. Mike, are you okay with all this?
Go.
Go. Marcy?
Must go.
Go. Monica?
Yes.
Sarah?
Absolutely.
All right, 5-0, it's a go. We will do a formal vote, as I said, once we get the resolutions next week, or next month. And I still think we will remain on track for our TM approval on the 22nd. So again, I just want to thank everybody who's involved in this. It is a ton of work, and not just this board appreciates it, but everybody does. So I think we're done with this part of the agenda.
We appreciate your time.
Thank you, friends.
Thank you
Appreciate
so much.
it. Next up are some transfers. We'll let these folks leave here, and then we will pick that up.
Can you turn on the screen?
So John, on the changing the schedule, what time were you thinking for the Zoom meetings?
Hey, guys.
Okay. I remember you saying they would be at a different time. So
Well, they could be. We just have to send some of those numbers.
so it's the budget.
Okay, Pam Gary, spending money again. What the heck, Pam?
That is a really good transition, John.
Okay, discuss and take action on a request for a transfer of $84,051 to the ARPA new paddle court account. Pam?
Trying. It's almost been a year now
Okay.
since we got approved for ARPA money to create a 6th court at paddle court at Weed Beach. And we went out to bid late last winter, February, March. Had one bidder. He came in under bid. And off we went to P&Z, and P&Z approved the permit on contingent upon making stronger, more specialized piers that the vendor didn't have in his plan. So the vendor then went out to find another designer and engineer to help them with the more specialized, rather than standard concrete piers. And after now, since that was the summer up until now, we got approval of the new plans with the building department approval. But again, they came back now after the new designs and the new engineer, and that is an additional $71,000 plus the additional cost that would be to tie in everything, which is the propane and electricity and cutting back the trees on the site. So that came into a total of 84 above.
So is this is for one paddle court, correct?
This is for an additional
This is-
one, which would make it our 6th paddle
Your
court.
sixth court, okay.
So very unfortunate in that respect, but P&Z, and I think too, it's, years ago, the 5 paddle courts weren't under the stringent new regulations and flood zones. So they were built with standard piers, and now it's not acceptable anymore. And sorry.
Do we know if those other courts are in trouble with those piers? Is there a feeling that maybe they should be upgraded now when we're doing that? Maybe there's some economy of scale? I mean, do we know what the conditions are?
Conditions are fine. They're withholding just fine. But unfortunately, the regulations, new regulations aren't going to go backwards. They're only going forward. So regardless of the fact that they're doing just fine, they just need specialized piers in place.
This is a regulatory compliance problem, not obviously something's wrong with these existing courts problem. So this is, Kate, anything to add to that?
No?
No? Other questions?
Yeah, Pam, so when did the regulations change?
That's a Jeremy question.
Okay.
But I want to say, no, I'd be guessing. I can't guess.
I mean, it just seems like a lot of money for one court, right? We got a 45% bump. I think it would be, I think it would be helpful for me anyhow, when this comes forward, if we could see the breakout a little bit more on where the costs were, right? So you have emergency access plans resulting in cost increases. Final propane hookup. So it sounds to me like maybe it's 75 for the piers and 10 for the additional.
It's 63,000 for the piers. It is an additional 8,500 for the new company with the new engineer. And then the breakdown of 9,200 to hook up propane, 5,000 for electrical. We got $4,500 for tree work. And all of that, the original 133 that the vendor came in at was below our 155 that we had put out for a bid. So we had all that additional money to do the hookups, the propane and the tree work and the electrical. But then when this happened, we had to build that back in.
Okay, so I saw somewhere this was penciled at 185,000, but it's not.
No.
No, okay.
So
This was an ARPA
with the
project, right?
with the 133 original budget, and if you add the 84,000 I'm asking for, it brings it up to 217,000.
Okay.
So just for going forward, to Monica's point, one thing that'll help on all these transfers, if it's adding money to a project, it would help by starting kind of the discussion. Here's where we were before. This was the cost, and here's everything that was included. Okay. Here's what's changed, right? So we're adding this and this and this in some line item detail, because somebody has that line item detail. That's how you got the project.
Right.
And so just having that kind of table that says, here's where we were, we're having to add this is the cost, pulled straight out of the bid documents or
Right.
whatever you've got, and here's kind of the new total, and the delta between these two is the appropriation, because then you'll short circuit 10 minutes of conversation by just having that all
Right.
there, because we'll see it in advance and it'll be a 2-second.
Yeah.
If you included the bid and so forth, it's helpful.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would help.
Doesn't come up frequently, but when you do that, and I'd say just generally for all these things, anytime we're adding something to have that kind of detail, it'll make for a
Right.
shorter
And
conversation.
unfortunately for me, and since when I put this request in, I was backpedaling, trying to get that additional tie-ins that were separate from the project.
Right.
They were included, but they were separate because the vendor didn't do that additional work. So I was trying to really wrap that up in the last 2 weeks. And so as of today, I was able to get the 9,200, the 4,500 tree work, the 5,000 electrical. So I was able to get those.
And since you've had nothing else to do.
No.
right, okay.
So when would you like me to get this to you?
You explained it enough for me.
Yeah, I'd say this is not for this, but for
Okay.
future ones to do that. That'll just make that more efficient. Other questions for Pam? Okay, motion to approve the transfer of $84,051 to the ARPA new paddle port account from contingency. Monica moves. Sarah seconds. All in favor? Okay, thank you.
Thanks very
Monica.
much for your time.
Okay, next up is discuss and take action on a request to transfer certain unexpended balances in the ARPA fund to ARPA contingency. Kate?
Right. So Jen reached out to all the departments that had ARPA projects to get what the status was, and could any of the funds be released. And as a result, you have this request to transfer $95,000 and change from these individual projects that have been completed into the ARP contingency.
So Kate, will this balance be after the paddle court or before the paddle court?
I think it would be
I
before.
think it's before.
So we're going to draw
You know-
this right back down.
I don't think she has a contingency on the sheet. I know we needed to do this to fully fund that, because originally we were talking about taking some money from another Parks and Rec regular capital project to help fund the paddle courts. But Jen wanted to use up ARPA money.
Right.
So these closeouts will help fund that.
Okay, so we don't know if this balance is going to be drawn down from that 85 that Pam
I
just
believe it
wanted.
will be drawn down
It will
from that
be,
95,
okay.
yeah.
Leaves us 11 or so.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Are we voting on that?
I mean, I'm certainly okay with that transfer. I think it's good hygiene to keep track of these projects and identify money that can go back into contingency. So Jen should definitely consider or continue to do that.
Well, we're trying to make sure that we get the money spent.
Right.
Yep.
Lose it.
Yeah, I was saying in here that it was December of next year that we had to commit all these
We have to
funds.
commit, yeah.
Okay. All right. Other questions for Kate on this? Motion to approve? Mike moves, Marcy second, all in favor? Okay, thanks. Okay. Next up, appointments, Advisory Board of Health, Kate.
So the advisory boards have a one-year life, and the majority of them, we reappoint every December for the upcoming year. Prior to putting any of them on the agenda for reconsideration, we did ask each of them to send in a report on their activities and their plans, so that you could review them. Just in case there was any that you wanted to say, well, we're good, we're done with this board. We did not receive a report from the Advisory Committee on Sustainability by the time we were, by the agenda deadline, so that's why they're not on this list. We have since received that report, so they'll be up for consideration in January.
Okay. Not that I'm recommending any changes in any of these boards, but one thing I mentioned in the state of town, and we've kind of talked a little bit about, is that I'd like to appoint a small committee to take a look at stuff like this, right? So this is about our existing committee structure and all the different boards and committees that we have. It's also about the various boards and commissions that are in place to think about the roles that they play in town and to just sharpen up and clarify who's supposed to do what when. The reason I say that is it has felt at times that there's a little, and I don't mean this nefariously, but lane creep among the various boards and commissions, RTM, all of that. And just having an effort where we could go through and just take a step back and say, are the roles and responsibilities of all these different groups well-defined? And it's a clear this, but importantly not this, in terms of the activities they engage in and where they fit into certain processes. I think that effort could actually extend to these boards that are chartered by the Board of Selectmen. When you think about it, their purpose is to help us do something, either because we don't have the capacity or we don't have the knowledge or expertise. And so you think about these boards or the Coastal Advisory Commission or the Advisory Board of Health, those are all volunteers and some professionals that have joined those boards to try to help us with that. And as part of this, we could simply refresh the charter from the Board of Selectmen to those individual committees and say, yep, we've rethought that and we really believe you guys should stay in place and here's the area of focus that we want. We could also ensure that there's Board of Selectmen liaisons to each one of these committees to make sure they have a point of contact and that they're always doing something to help us in our board role function more effectively on behalf of the town. So that was something that I wanted to do. I'm just wondering whether, like some of our board appointments, it's absolutely necessary to recharter these committees for a year. And if we were to do so and there were some changes, say in March or towards the middle of the year, with the fact that we reappointed the charter for these committees impede us from making any changes or adjustments.
Well, the first part about reconstituting them, yes, you do have to do that.
Okay.
Okay.
But Well, it's kind of like board appointments. We do need to reappoint these people, and the fact is there's a
Right,
lot we have
but
not appointed.
specifically in the code, and
Okay.
I don't have it in front of me, but they only last for they only last for the year.
Okay, new information, that's helpful.
You
Alright.
could, I suppose, disband them mid-year if you felt they were no longer necessary. You can also change their charge
Okay, that's fine.
as you see necessary.
Well, the one thing I would really emphasize with these boards, all of these boards have members who have volunteered to step up to try to help with those three topics. So Health, Coastal Waters Advisory Board, I've sat in on a few of these meetings and talked to folks who are on those boards. And like all our volunteers, I cannot thank you enough for agreeing to do that and to be part of those efforts. It really speaks a lot to the citizens we have in this town that folks are willing to sit on those boards and try to help us. And any efforts that we might undertake this year would be to try and make it not just more helpful for the town, but to show you that this is really a good use of your time. And I don't want anybody to ever feel like they're spinning their wheels on any of these boards, and this will be part of this effort to make sure that we don't have that problem going forward to the extent we even have it now. So my view is that we should go ahead and reappoint these boards now, and that as our committee effort takes shape in the new year, while we can revisit those boards at this time, but we should go ahead and reappoint them now.
I agree.
Okay. Do we need to reappoint them individually, or can we appoint all at once in one motion?
I think you can reappoint them all at once in one motion.
Could I have a motion to reappoint the Advisory Board of Health, the Advisory Commission on Coastal Waters, and the Darien TV Advisory Board for a one-year term? Sarah moves, Mike second, all in favor? Okay, thank you. Minutes. I did not have any corrections to the minutes. Did anyone see anything that I may have missed?
No.
Nope. Okay, these are the minutes for December 11th. Could I have a motion to approve the Board of Selectmen minutes for the special meeting on December 11th, 2023? Sarah moves, Mike second, all in favor? Okay, approved, thank you. That's it. Agenda review, I know, Mike, you'd wanted Parks and Rec to come by, and I will talk to Lori about getting that done in the new year, but that's on the list, so duly noted. Anyone else have anything for agenda review? No? Okay. I believe that is it. Our next meeting is on January 8th, and we will try to get through the HHR resolutions at that meeting. Could I have a motion to adjourn? Sarah moves. Marcy second. All in favor? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.